My name's Caroline and I'm a development manager and I'm based at a charity called Unltd. We're the Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs, and what we're all about really is supporting people out in communities who've got ideas for projects or ventures that will tackle social problems in their communities and make their community a better place, basically. And when we sort of say social entrepreneurs, that's a term that not many people have heard of, but what that's really about is someone who's seen an issue in their community, has thought of a solution which they actually want to implement themselves to tackle that problem and create a positive social change in their area. We do this we support these people in a number of ways. So we basically back that individual. So they come to us with their idea and then we support them with a package of funding and one-to-one support, access to networks to help them develop their skills and get their ideas off the ground, basically. We work all over the UK and we work with anyone aged 11 and upwards. And it's all about really supporting that individual and enabling them basically to go out and make their communities a better place. It's an interesting one because there's sort of no one definition for social enterprise. Depending on who you're speaking to or what organisation, there's lots of different definitions out there. And also it's quite a big umbrella term for kind of quite a lot of different types of activities. What I would say is a social enterprise, or what Unltd would see as a social enterprise, is some kind of venture or project where kind of tackling a problem or a social issue is really at the heart of what they're trying to do, and that the activities that they're doing, that's what that's geared towards. So it's not just about making a financial profit like with sort of standard enterprise, but it's potentially using that kind of business model approach or kind of an entrepreneurial approach to tackle a particular issue and create a positive social outcome. And that's the really kind of key thing that everything else is based around, effectively. Yeah, I mean, well, definitely from my experience working as a development manager at Unltd with social entrepreneurs who are starting up, there's sort of quite a few common challenges that I notice. One particularly time. I mean, I work with young people aged 11 to 21, and initially when they come to us with an idea, it can be really ambitious, it can be really exciting, but sort of later down the line in their journey, they'll feel like, oh, it's taking me longer than I thought it would. And that's with, school commitments, or if you're older, maybe you're working. So it's that kind of perhaps overestimating what you can achieve, and actually it does take a lot more time than you would think to kind of really get something going from when you think at the beginning. Another big challenge that some of the social entrepreneurs we've worked with have sort of faced is that particularly finding your customers and getting that first customer, which I think probably relates quite closely to entrepreneurship and enterprise in general. So kind of marketing, different techniques of marketing, knowing your market and how you're going to reach them and how you're going to talk to them and sell what you're doing to kind of get your project going is a really big challenge, and often something quite new that people are doing. So we do a lot of support around that if need be, to kind of help that entrepreneur or social entrepreneur think about what it is, who they're going to be talking to and how best can they reach them. For example, if they're working with young people, maybe they want to be really using social media or digital media as a way to kind of access and speak to young people. The primary aim is about making a social impact, but one thing I would also say is what makes a social enterprise is also the social entrepreneur. So that person who's driving that project, it's their idea, it's their vision, their passion basically, and also that entrepreneurial spark that really kind of drives a project and really makes it what it is, particularly because we work with a lot of people in startup phases or very early. Often it is just one person and it's kind of something that they start up themselves, and they really make, without a social entrepreneur you won't have a social enterprise basically. Well, it's definitely not a sort of a decision to be taken lightly or rushed. It's definitely worth really spending some time thinking about that and getting some really good advice, because there's lots of different types of legal structures that a social enterprise can take, lots and lots, and they each have their pluses and minuses and things like that. But what legal structure you take really does depend on what you're doing and also how you want to finance it. So for example, if you're going to be getting a lot of your finance from potentially turning over a profit and trading, you don't necessarily want to then set up as a charity, because then you're limited in kind of how much money you can get from that kind of income stream. So my advice, and the advice I give to my award winners, is get some really good legal advice so they can recommend what legal form you should take, but also so you are really clear also on the governance side of stuff. So if you're a company, you know, what you have to do for Companies House. And that's one thing that we do provide for our award winners, is we get lawyers who offer their services for free to help advise award winners and the social entrepreneurs we work with what legal structure to take. Because if you make a rush decision, set up something, it actually can be quite tricky to unpick that later down the line. So definitely get some really good advice is mine, some good legal advice. Well, in terms of the pros, there's the pro that, you know, what you're doing is actually making an impact to communities and other people's lives and tackling sort of very real problems and challenges faced by society today. So that's a massive pro for me. But also it's worth considering the actual benefits that it'll have on you yourself if you're setting up your sort of some kind of venture. I mean, again, people that we've worked with, the impact on them has been absolutely huge in terms of building their skills, building their confidence. Again, a lot of the young people that I've worked with start up a project just because it's something they're interested in, and then through the journey of the award they actually start considering this as a viable career option for them. So it could be an alternative way of getting into the job market, or it could be an alternative way of building skills that you wouldn't necessarily get elsewhere or might complement other forms of education. So that's definitely worth kind of considering. In terms of cons, again, kind of relating to what I said about social enterprise being kind of, there's no one definition. There's also not a huge amount of recognition across, like, more widely outside the sector about what that actually is. And sometimes that jargon can kind of confuse people, or people might not necessarily get what you're about, or the fact that there's lots of these different definitions that can sometimes, I don't know, it might just kind of put people off. If they hear some words they don't understand, they might not then really understand what you're doing or want to be involved. So that could potentially be a con to social enterprise. Well, the really key thing, I think, is to think about who your audiences are and who you're talking to. Particularly, so when I'm talking to young people about Unltd and the support they can access and what they can get if they want to set up a project that will benefit their community. If I'm going into a school, I don't go in and be like, hey, who wants to set up a social enterprise? I don't lead with that, because I know initially I'll have probably lost the attention of quite a few of the young people because they just don't know what I'm talking about. So it's really knowing who you're talking to and kind of tailoring how you talk about what you're doing so it's relevant for them. So if you're working with, say, people who are unemployed, that you're kind of using a language and you're talking about stuff that's of interest to them and that they can relate to, because then that will kind of, you can then have a dialogue with them. Otherwise, if you're kind of like, we're a social enterprise that does this, this and this, they might be like, okay, well, what's that mean to me? What does that, how does that relate to where I am? Yeah, I mean, it's the similar thing I think I sort of said before. It's just there's not a lot of knowledge and understanding about what that is. So within the social entrepreneurship, social enterprise sector, that it's a buzzword, people will kind of know what you're talking about. But if you're talking wider than that, say you've got a business model where you're actually selling a service to a local council and they're paying you to deliver a service on behalf of them, kind of that might cause some confusion, particularly since public bodies have their own kind of language in which they talk about, so it can cause a bit of a disconnect there. So again, it's just worth thinking about how you tailor your language to kind of who your audience is or who you're trying to engage with. Well, definitely at the beginning, absolutely. I mean, the work that we do is supporting individuals who are sort of stepping up to the plate and saying, right, I've got an idea, I think it could really work. I just need some support to kind of get it going. So often at the very beginning, it is an individual person kind of getting that ball rolling and starting. As you'd hope, it would develop and grow. And as that develops and grows, it gets to a point where that individual social entrepreneur will need to probably start pulling in other resources, because you can't do it all yourself, particularly if you're expanding and demand is growing. And particularly also if you don't have some skills, it's not necessarily just about you building those skills, but also pulling in other people who can do that sort of stuff. And I think that's quite an entrepreneurial trait, is that ability to pull people in, building a team. So if you're not so good on your financial, sort of monitoring of finances, actually getting someone on board who that's their bag, they really like that, would be sort of a way to kind of grow your business. But definitely at the beginning, it's, a social entrepreneur can start something up themselves and lead that change themselves. Well, my advice to people who are kind of interested in this and kind of want to start up something, really take it back to basics and think about the social problem that you're trying to tackle. Pick something that you're passionate about. You're going to be working very hard on it. You want to be able to sustain your interest. And also, if you're passionate about it, you'll be able to hook other people in, because your passion will kind of speak volumes, basically. But really think about what that problem is. Do your research as well, and go out to your community. Talk to people that you potentially want to be working with. Look at what other people are doing, so you can start seeing where the gap in the market and where that real need is. Because once you understand that issue, you can then really understand how you can solve that, and what you can do to solve that, and where people aren't doing things and where you can add value, basically. And so kind of the idea kind of growing quite organically from that issue is generally what I kind of advise to people when they're kind of at that early kind of idea generation stage. It's a really interesting question, actually. So, because I think sort of in my head, the way sort of ethical business is sort of their primary function, not their primary function, but their primary aim is turning over a profit. It's that sort of, that financial returns, basically. They may sort of adopt some ethical practices in doing that. So if they're a clothing company, they may use fair trade products, things like that, to make what they're selling. But really at the heart of what they're doing is making a profit. Whereas again, a social enterprise, it's almost that financial turnover is a means by where they actually make a social impact. So the primary aim is making a difference to X problem or changing this. And the finances is a way of them to do that and to keep doing that. So it's kind of the other way around, if that kind of makes sense. Yeah, so the idea, a lot of the sort of social entrepreneurs we work with look to generate income through a variety of different income streams, but look to make it develop a business model whereby their project is sustainable, so they don't have to be going out for grants or chasing funding, because that can be quite time consuming. It's also means that you're constantly trying to gear what you're doing towards funders. But actually, if you're in a position where you're either selling part of your service, so for example, you could take like a community cafe, for example, so they make that sustainable by selling cafe food and stuff like that, but their primary aim might be engaging with young people who are unemployed or something like that, or bringing healthy food to a community where there's quite a lot of high deprivation, for example. But I've lost my train of thought now.
No,
but
I was just saying it was an interest, it was personal interest.
But yeah, it gets ploughed back in, and to pay for wages, because they'll also get to a point where the social entrepreneur is like, okay, I'm doing this in my spare time, I need to pay myself, I need to live. So they'll pay themselves a salary and stuff like that, but it's very much that's with a view so they can keep doing it and keep doing what they're doing even more and expand and grow and help more people. So that's kind of where their focus is in terms of getting that sort of turnover. Well, I was sort of chatting to a few colleagues in the office, actually, doing a little bit of a survey to see what the general consensus was. I think one is people get quite sort of anxious about it and quite bogged down in business planning, particularly if you're at an early stage. You don't need a 16-page, really complicated thing. Keep it really simple, because you are early stage, and it's something that it's a document that you actually want to be able to use. You don't just write a business plan, be like, right, I've done my business plan, now I can put it on the shelf, and then I go off and do stuff. it's a tool that you'll use to either go out and get more funding or get sponsorship. It's a tool that you'll use to actually plan out your project. So it's not something you spend ages on and then leave to one side. You need to be kind of re-looking at it and changing it as your project evolves. And yeah, just keeping it really simple, keeping it really clear, avoid using sort of jargon or complicated language. And potentially also another sort of thing which we see, which people kind of fall down, is not being really clear about what their aims and objectives are. Because that's almost the first thing that you really want to be clear on. What is my big vision? What's the big change that I'm trying to make? And what are the specific things I'm going to do to try and achieve that big change? If you've got that really tight and you really understand that, everything will flow from there, basically. But if you're a bit woolly around that sort of stuff and you're not quite sure what it is you're exactly trying to do, then it will reflect in kind of when you're starting to think about what your budget is or your financial projections, or it will kind of embed itself through your project plan. So those are kind of the big things, I think, with business planning. Keep it simple and just be really clear about what your aims and objectives are. Well, for one thing, if they've got an idea, definitely come to an organisation like us, like Unltd. That's what we do. We're about supporting individuals and helping them develop their potential and unleash their potential in terms of creating impact in their communities. And as I say, it's that really do your research. So if you're thinking about starting up, really start proactively going out in your community and speaking to relevant parties and people to kind of get their feedback, see if they want to be involved, and just generally that will help build your idea, and also know that whether you're onto something that's potentially something that's going to be really good, basically. And those contacts will help you later down the line when you're starting to actually implement some of your plans, and you've got contacts of people that you've been talking to, and those relationships will be really, really valuable to you. Often
not very well articulated.
Yeah, I kind of know what you mean. So I think some of the so when the issue for like sustainability comes up in terms of starting to be motivated to sort of turn over a profit, comes from, I know with some of the young people we've worked with, they'll sort of have an idea for a project, they'll start doing it, they'll just see at that point in their head, it's like, well, I've seen this problem, I want to do something about it, and I've got an idea. And then when they start actually doing it and they start seeing the impact of what they're doing, and realise that, I am actually making a difference, then that passion, that desire to be like, and I want to keep doing this, and then you start thinking about, well, how can I keep doing this? Well, I'll need more money, or if I want to do this more, I need to find a way in which I can grow. And so that's sometimes when that sort of desire to start maybe turning over a profit or finding some kind of business model that then will make what you're doing sustainable kind of kicks in, because there's that desire to keep doing what they're doing. And I think sometimes with the sort of creating that social impact or understand that, I know some people and again, this comes into the support that we provide, is actually it's sometimes quite tricky to really understand what impact you're making in your community. It's a kind of, making sure they do sort of evaluate and monitor and kind of do a bit of their own research into the impact they're having, but really understanding that is definitely something that we have to support them with, and again, that's a journey which our award winners go on, where they sort of start to really get to grips, because you can have an idea at the beginning, but then like a year later you might then actually be like, I didn't expect it would do this, but because they've learnt it as they've actually done it, basically.